Hey, podcast listeners, we are back. Dan Cumberland here. I am so excited for the conversation that I have to share with you today. Steve Magness is a running coach turned peak performance expert and coach. He, in this conversation, we get to go to just so many great places. He has just so much insight into what it means to perform at the top of your game, and we get to geek out on all the things that I love to geek out on. Performance, mindset, the inner game of athletics and athleticism. I get to ask some geeky running questions, which I'm really into. It was just such a fun conversation. So hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're interested in the kinds of things that I'm talking about with Steve here today, I'm building an accelerator to help entrepreneurs love the businesses that they're building for the long haul, avoid burnout, make a life and a business that you love. It's all launching in the beginning of 2023. I would love to share more with you about it if it's the kind of thing that you're interested in. Defining success as more than just a financial metric, but understanding the metrics that measure your own personal success so that you can love your life, not just when your business is booming and excelling in the future, but even in the present, regardless of the business's performance. You can find out more about that at themeaningmovement.com/start. You can take the burnout risk assessment there. It's a series of questions that I put together to help you understand your pace, your current reality, and then hopefully from there, bring some awareness to how you are doing in this area. After you take that assessment, you can jump on a call with me. We can talk about putting together a personal plan for you, and I can share more about the assessment. You can find out more about that at themeaningmovement.com/start. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Meaning Movement podcast. We know you want to build a stress-free life and business that gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. In order to do that, you have to eliminate the conflict between your work and the rest of your life. But the problem is running a business is hard and requires sacrifice and commitment, leaving you feeling depleted, exhausted, and even burned out. But we believe that every entrepreneur deserves to recapture the motivation and energy they need to run their business. And that is what this show is all about. I'm your host, Dan Cumberland. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening, and let's go. Steve, welcome to the Meaning Movement podcast. I'm so excited to have you here with us. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, Dan, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you.
The question I like to start with is, how do you begin to talk about the work that you do?
Yeah, it used to be a straightforward answer, but now it's kind of this complicated answer. And I think I try to simplify it in the sense that I try to help people perform better at whatever it is they're doing or whatever challenges they're tackling.
I love it. And so let's explore that, let's unpack that a little bit. What are the different manifestations that takes? Or maybe or you could this is a choose your own adventure question. Or what kind of things are people tackling?
Yeah, that's, what kind of manifestation? So that's a good question. So maybe some background will help is that most of my life I spent in the athletic realm. So that's why that question was very simple to ask. How do I help people perform better? I help them get faster or stronger or perform in their athletic feat. It was simple. I could give that
easy to measure.
Exactly. Easy to measure. But then, being for whatever reason, I've expanded beyond that and now help still do some athletes, but it's really helping tackle kind of the nuanced questions of, well, what does performance look like in the workplace? What does it look like for an artist or entrepreneur? And we can't always measure that as well. Yes. And what I would also say is I don't focus on performance in the sense of, how many books you sold or how much money you made or what have you. I'm talking about you and holistically how you're doing. So in terms of tackling, what do I help people tackle? It's often those challenges that allow them to, sustain their work over the long haul, the perspective to allow them to say, like, is this the work that I still want to do? Right.
Yes. Yes.
And then answering those difficult questions of like, well, how do I get through these stressful moments or difficult times in whatever work I'm doing and pursuing, and like what are the tools I need to develop to do so?
I love it. I like this. I've been so excited to talk to you because of I'm so interested in everything that you just said. I'm a runner, not of the caliber that you're used to working with, but I like to put in some miles, and so physical performance is very. I also do calisthenics, but I feel like running is. I've been binging some of your coaching podcasts and learning a lot, and feel a little out of my depth sometimes. So I'm not a coach, but it's just such good stuff. I'm gonna keep listening to it. But then also just the crossover from athletics and running into performance, and just how you're defining performance even now, like holistically, like holistic performance and how you're doing in your work. Like this stuff just gets me fired up. So this is going to be fun. I'm excited for this. I want to start just with the question: how do you define performance, or how do you define peak performance, good performance? I'm not sure which iteration of those words to choose, but I want to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, so to me it's really aligning with like what your basic kind of psychological needs or physical needs are in whatever it is you're doing. So
Yeah.
when I look at, we'll just use peak performance. Well, what does that mean? It means like showing up and doing the thing that aligns with my purpose,
Yeah.
which is like, well, what aligns with my purpose? Well, it's like the thing that interests you and develops from interest to passion, and from passion to like this calling or something that, pulls you towards it. So again, maybe to simplify for the listeners, I almost look at it again holistically. We can look at performance, well, in terms of social and connection, which could be like family and support and all those things. Why is that performance? Well, it allows you to do the things that you need to do. If
Yeah.
you don't have that support structure or that connection and feeling of belonging, you're not going to be able to perform, physically, emotionally, psychologically, whatever have you. Then we can
Yes.
look at other buckets like, we can call it physical performance, or we could call it health and movement, which is like, do you have I'm not even talking athletically, do you have some sort of practice where it's like you're active? And this
Yeah.
doesn't have to be exercise per se, but like even going on walks or what have you, because I think physical movement again provides that foundation where we can be a healthy, happy, functioning, performing human being. And
Mm.
then we can look at again like things like our pursuits. Well, you know, what are the things that we care about that we're trying to quote unquote perform at? And then
Hmm.
the other thing that I think is really important in terms of like this performance idea is, are you doing it in a way that is sustainable over the long haul? Instead of like, oh, I'm just excited about this, I'm going to go all into this, and then, be burnt out in 6 months and hate the thing that I once loved. So
Yes.
it's really, how do you create that sustainable model that really, really matters?
I love it. I love it. Just the again, like that holistic approach, like that we are complex beings, and rather than maybe myopically focusing on one specific aspect, thinking about the whole picture of yeah, all the different facets of life, and helping us move ourselves forward in all those areas at once is kind of how I hear you defining it, which is, yeah. Does that sound right?
Exactly. And I think,
Yeah.
a lot of it goes to, well, why is that important?
Yeah.
And it is because, when we're so almost myopic, as you said, we're almost fragile.
Mm.
Because if
Hmm.
our whole life and our whole identity and our whole sense of self is wrapped around like maybe one thing, and we say like, whatever it is, like my job defines me. Well, what happens is that almost pushes us to a place where we're now performing out of a place of fear.
Mm. Hmm.
And like, I have to do this instead of
Yes.
I want to do this.
Yes.
And that is not a place where we're going to A, be sustainable, and B,
Mm.
like perform and be happy doing it.
Yes.
So I think that holistic, like I call it like diversifying your sources of like meaning, where
Yes,
you
I love that.
where you can get it from different areas, so that because sometimes I'll be honest, Dan, is like I'm gonna struggle in what I'm doing, and if it's a bad day at work or a bad day writing, for example, that's I can be like, you know what, writing didn't go my way, but I've got A, B, and C and D over here, which are important
Yes.
to me and are still here, so it's not the end of the world.
Mm, I love that so much. I just wrote down like diversifying your sources of meaning. That's just such a good way of putting it. And I feel like that's a misconception a lot of people have when they find my work is they're like, I'm trying to find my calling. I'm trying to find that thing that I'm supposed to be doing, but they're thinking about what they're doing their 9 to 5. Whereas that's just one of the many places in our lives where we can find meaning. And I hear you inviting people to again take that more holistic approach. That's a great place to look for meaning, but it's not the only place. Some people have more agency, more ability to choose what they're doing with that part of their lives, but others don't. But that doesn't mean that the others that aren't able to choose, make more intentional choices about how they're spending their time, that one, they can't make choices about what they're doing in that specific job to make it more meaningful, and also like that their life outside of their job, like that's devoid of meaning because they don't have a job that's super sexy and cool. So I love it. I'm just so on board with everything that you're saying here. I want to just zoom out a little bit and rewind a little bit and just ask, how did you get into this, very specific niche? And you've already referenced that you were in the athletics world, but maybe just give us just a high level overview of some of your major twists and turns of your career.
Yeah, I've had a lot of them. So
Yes.
when I was younger, as I said, all I cared about was athletics, and particularly my sport was running. So track
Mm-hmm.
and field and running, and that was all that mattered to me. So much so that, like, in high school, I did schoolwork because I wanted to stay eligible so that I can compete in running. I went to college literally so that I could keep running and keep competing. And people are like, well, what do you want to do in school? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, whatever they
Just
stick me
run.
in. Yeah, I'm going to run.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and this will come up later, but it's like so much so that, like, in high school, I think I only read like one book like my entire high school career. Like, I'd read the like cliff notes or watch the movie or whatever
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
were assigned books. So I tell that because now, like, I am literally a writer and author,
Yes.
and I think that's important, one of these twists and turns, because often we think of this kind of linear path of like A
Yes.
leads to B to C to D, and we have to have it all planned out and figure it out. And that simply isn't the case. This isn't reality. If I had a time machine and I could go back and tell 16-year-old Steve, you're going to be a writer and write, I don't know, 250-page books or whatever it is, he'd be like, do you know me? Like,
You have the wrong Steve.
yeah, you went back to the wrong person. Like, this isn't me. I don't do that stuff.
Yeah.
And that is such an important lesson to me, because it's like you almost have to accept that, like, you're going to change and develop, and you have to be open to those spots.
Mm.
So I guess
Mm-hmm.
to tell my story again, it was all running. And then
Yeah.
what happened is I was like, well, I guess I've got to figure out something to do. So it became, all coaching runners and
Yes.
athletes.
Yeah.
So it was all in that realm. And I loved that and enjoyed that for a long while. But what happened is essentially two things. Is like, I was in the high level space of coaching high level runners, and still do to a degree, but like very deep in it. And I just found myself in an experience where where I was I was a whistleblower essentially
Hmm.
on some performance enhancing drug use, some
Mm.
anti-doping use. And that like shifted my experience of the high level sport.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, okay, I'm devoting my life to this like high level Olympic level sport, and we have this stuff that goes against, my view of sport and ethics and values and all that stuff. So it really kind of changed my view and made me, force me in some ways to like diversify my skill set.
Mm.
So what happened over time is like that's actually what pushed me into getting into writing.
Yeah.
And I started writing because I was like, you know what? I'm interested in these topics. I want
Yeah.
to explore them. Well, what allows me to explore them? Well, writing books and articles and all that allows me to talk to interesting people and smart people and explore ideas. And this sounds really interesting.
Mm.
So that started almost like as a side gig, side hustle, almost diversion from my day job of coaching track and field athletes. But
Yes.
over time that grew and took over importance where I was like, this is something that I want to pursue. And it's taken up a larger and larger and larger amount of my time ever since that. So it's like, yeah, I still help runners and like athletes, all that stuff, but I primarily work in the other space, which used to be the minority, which is writing, researching, like, and coaching people on like holistic performance.
I love it. Wow. Thank you for that synopsis. It's really helpful. I'm so curious about that. I don't know if these aren't your words, but I'll just put them into your mouth and you can spit them out if you prefer. Like it almost feels like this disenchantment, or like you got to the top and you're like, I don't actually like it here as much as I thought I would, or like certain aspects of it, and that it's like through that maybe negative experience, like it feels like it kind of created this new space that something else kind of merged into it. But I also feel like it sounds like a really hard, I would imagine be a really emotional, like kind of, I don't know, disappointment, frustration, disillusionment. What words do you use to describe that transition there?
Yeah, disillusion is a good one. I like the words you stuck in my mouth. I'm gonna stick with
Yes,
those.
yes. Success.
But it's a good because it's almost like the way I like to describe it is you have this view of what reality you think it is, and you have
Hmm.
this image, and you've got it, and then you get there, and you're looking around, and I was like, this isn't what I signed up for.
Yes.
And you almost
Yes.
get like smacked in the face of like having to come to terms with how things actually are
Mm.
versus how you imagined them. And
Yep.
and it really does make you feel a little disillusioned and
Hmm.
almost like it's almost to a degree like you have to you the world feels a little bit fragmented, and
Hmm.
now you are in charge of like putting it back together in the place and the pieces that you want to. And I
Yeah.
think that's where that space comes in, as it's like, okay, this wasn't what I expected, this isn't what I signed up for, so what is it I really want to do?
Yep.
Like, how do I want to create that space in my environment so that I can maybe pursue things in a way that aligns with my passions, my pursuits a lot better? And
Yeah.
that's kind of, again, it wasn't easy. It was
Yeah.
a lot of that, that those emotions and negative
Yeah.
emotions and things like you said.
Totally.
But it's almost like that traumatic experience allowed that space for you to like pick apart past
Mhm.
assumptions and then be like, okay, I'm in charge here. Like, what path do I want to take forward? This isn't just like a single path that I have to stay on.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like it's just such an important moment because that's where so many listeners are right now, and I think that's why I want to kind of focus in on that because like so often, we start careers, you finish school, you go, you get your degree, you go out in the workforce, and you're like, oh, this isn't what I thought it would be, or like whatever, you get that dream job and it's not a dream anymore. Whatever iteration of that, you get your band gets to that point where you get to book that North American tour, and then it's like you're just sleeping on dirty couches every night. Like I don't know, like, but like it happens, and it happens so much, and then you have to ask that question of like, do I find a new way to love this thing that I'm doing? Or do I find something new to love, or like some kind of combination of both? And it feels like you've kind of done a little bit of both because you're still coaching, but like it feels like you kind of have backed away from that as being like the only thing, and some beautiful things have grown out of it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it really is that space. And that is often the difficult decision. And I think too often on life, we're told, like, oh, you hit that decision and then you just like put your head down and you just grind through it. And you're just
Yes.
like, I'm going to push because this is what I signed up for, years ago.
Yeah.
And that might be a way, but what I try and tell people is they're in those spots. You want to step back and create the space and clarity so that you know and are clear on the decision you're making and the path that you're going down. Because
Mm,
often what happens is, again, when we get in those spots, is our worldview is so narrow that often we only see the path ahead of us.
yeah.
And what we have to do is get perspective to see, oh, there are different options.
Yes.
There are different ways to, do this thing, or, integrate what I'm doing in a better way into my
Mm,
life. And in those moments, I almost like to think of it as I need to, instead of putting on my hard work, whatever hat, I need to put on my explorer hat, which
I
is
love that.
being okay and sitting around and being like, well, what happens if I go down this path? What does this path potentially look like? Like, how can
Yes.
I imagine this? It's almost like the metaphor or analogy I'd use is, when you're like, I don't know if you had this experience, but when you're a kid, maybe in like first or second or third grade, whatever have you, you'd find something that would interest you, and then you'd like go crazy on it for like a week, and then you'd throw
Yes.
it off and you'd do something else,
Yes. I have a almost 7-year-old, and so I relate to that in my own life, but also I see him do that so much. Like, that was your favorite thing. Like, it feels like 10 minutes ago, and now you're not even, that was your Lego set that was your life, and now it's just you don't care anymore. So I'm with
It,
you.
exactly. That's it. The Lego set. And
Yeah.
what I would say is we don't need to go to that extreme, but it's like
Yeah.
kind of go back to that place where what are kids doing? Well, they're young. They don't know what they like. Like,
Yep.
they're not thinking of like, oh, I got to make this decision on the Lego set I'm going to have for the next 5 years of my life. They're thinking like, I'm going to explore interesting things and go deep enough to see if like I really enjoy it. And then if,
Yep.
I stop enjoying it, I'm going to go find something else better to do. And
Yeah.
I think,
Mm,
again, not to that extreme, but to some degree, as adults, we lose that, and we
yep.
gotta like put that hot hat back on every once in a while, where we
Yes.
can like put something down, pick something else up, explore it, and maybe we come back to the original thing. But that exploration allows us to get clarity and to see if we should, keep going, or if we
Yep.
should pivot.
Yeah, and then when you come back to that original thing, you're a new person because you've have more insight, different perspective, which I think is a really helpful, metaphor for folks. And so people listening, just to kind of speak to you, just listeners directly, like if you're in that space, I think what Steve here is inviting you to is to put on that hat, take that seriously, and give yourself permission to just explore without a known outcome in mind, which I think is a really great invitation. I think one follow up to that I'm curious your thoughts on is like, in order to do that, you have to have the belief that it's going to work out, and like that you're going to be okay. And I think that sometimes can be really hard. I think especially if, well, especially if there's a lot of financial responsibilities, family responsibilities, like the pressure cooker that life can be. And it's like this whole layer on top of like this conversation of like, I don't know, I'm just curious if you have thoughts about like, how do you manage to hold the space of exploration while at the same time acknowledging that like it's hard.
Yeah, no, I mean, it absolutely is hard, and I think step one is acknowledging that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think often what happens, we set ourselves up almost unrealistically, and we think like, I'm gonna find this magic thing that's gonna fulfill all these things, and then I'm gonna jump to it and like have everything I need. The
yeah.
reality is that's not the case, and the reality
Mm,
is we have to worry about finances and bills and all
yep,
that good stuff.
yep,
So to me, again, it's it's every situation's different, but how do you set up your life to give you a little bit more freedom so you can explore? And
yeah,
I'll just give you my example from my life.
yeah,
Is when I was coaching, full time. It took up all my time. It was my financial security, all that good stuff. So I couldn't just go, all right, I'm gonna go become a writer right now and forget all this. So what I
yes,
did is in my my free time or in some downtime, or off season or what have you, when I had a little more space, I would explore this other passion. I'd start to
Mm.
write or blog, or back in the day, blog, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's, I actually wrote, again, my first book. First couple books were, I'm still coaching. Like, it's just still my primary thing. It wasn't until really my third book where I was like, okay, I have the financial security, everything in line where I can still coach, I can not coach, I could do it full time. It's like totally up to me because I'm not totally dependent on that. And
Yes.
and sometimes that takes time, and
Mm.
that's okay. So to me,
Yeah.
is, again, instead of framing it as like, where's the big thing I have to jump to, think of it as the small steps in dabbling, maybe,
Mm.
as you explore. And if you dabble and this thing grows and grows and grows, eventually, if it's viable, it's going to provide the time where you can make that decision to be like, you know what, this thing over here is it more than this thing I'm going to make that
Yeah.
switch.
I love it. That's so, so good. We'll get right back to our conversation, but I wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsor. This episode in this season of the podcast is brought to you by 923.co, a web and mobile app development team that I have been working directly with for more than a year, building VideoSnap. VideoSnap.io, if you don't know, is the software that I built to repurpose long-form speech-based content, like this podcast, into short-form viral ready videos. Think TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Reels, etc. If you're making content and you want to be found in the algorithms, you should be using VideoSnap. I've been building directly with 923, and they are a phenomenal team with a strong track record of building high quality apps. They've built more than 50 apps. Those apps have gone on to do more than $1 billion for their clients, which is incredible. I'm also now contributing to their team in a product strategy role, which means if you have a dream that you want to realize with software, not only should you talk to 923 because they are so good at software, but I could help you directly build that with them. Go to 923.co, all spelled out, 9networthree.co, and find out more. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. Tell me about, like, so it's easier for me to envision the path, like, to being a coach than it is to, like, being a performance writer. And so, like, was blogging a big part of, like, that transition for you to, like, seeing that, like, income and seeing the traction happen there, or what did it look like to, like, be able to say, like, okay, I'm actually going to, step all the way into these waters?
Yeah. So initially it was like, again, this was, I don't know, 2010 or something like that,
Yeah.
when blogging was a thing.
Yes.
So, I mean, initially, again, you have to remember, I'm coming at this from someone who didn't really read much or write
Yes.
much in high
Yeah.
school or even into college for part of it. So what I used is, like, blogging is like this exploration of, like, well, I think I can write okay, I'm going to do this. And honestly,
Yeah.
I'm sure if I look back, I'd be like, some of this is horrible.
Yes.
But it allows you that space where it's like, I'm not dependent on this to make money.
Yeah.
I'm not dependent on this as, like, if I suck, I suck. No one cares.
Yeah.
So it gives you that freedom to explore and, like, hone your skill.
Yeah.
Essentially to kind of play with that skill instead of, like, being thrown straight into the game. Is you're playing, you're exploring, all that stuff.
Yep.
And then from there, what that really allowed me to do is, like, I started making a little bit of money on, like, writing for some magazines or, websites that paid and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, that gives you, again, that little confidence, like, well, someone's willing to pay for me and this stuff, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I guess I'll do this. And then
Yes.
it's like a gradual step. From there, I was like, well, I got a small book deal. Like, it's not going to make me a lot of money, but someone wants to, like, pay to edit and put this out in the world. So sure, let's do it. And what you see is, over time, like, again, it's those small steps. And it was often the same way, in sport. Again, in sport, I was like all runners, and then helping people. I started writing in this performance space, and then, like, athletes who are, like, basketball players or hockey or whoever are reaching out, and I'm like, I don't know anything about basketball, but, like, we can talk.
Yeah.
And you have these conversations and you're like, oh, you're facing the same sort of anxieties and problems that like, maybe I do as a runner. So
Yep.
sure, I can help you here. And it
Yeah.
expands that world a little bit where you realize, oh, like I do have something to contribute here. And
Mm.
then you just kind of do that long enough. And then like if you do it well enough, like the doors kind of open up and it kind of takes care of itself to a degree.
I love it. It's so good and such a just iterative process. You step in a little bit, you push in a little bit, you see what happens, and then you push in a little bit more, and you see what happens, and just kind of keep iterating on down the path and see where it takes you, which I think is a really great metaphor. Um, so thinking about like you transitioning from running to basketball, I'm like, okay, well, basketball players run, and then like hockey, like, well, hockey's not, ice skating's not that different than running, but there are these principles that apply, and this is one of the questions I wanted to ask you, before, as I was thinking about this interview, if I feel like it's an impossible question. You can tell me if it's not. How much of performance? Well, I'm thinking through the lens of running, right?
Yeah.
How much of running is a mind game?
It's impossible to give a percentage on that, but I will say it is very much so.
Yeah.
Because like what happens is, let's think of running. What is it? It's you alone in your head,
Yes.
like feeling pain, discomfort, like fatigue, all of this barrage of emotions, accompanied by like, often these voices, these negative voices that tell you like, slow down, stop,
Yeah. You're not
step
going to
on.
make it. You can't
Yeah,
keep this up.
you can't. It's all
Yeah.
like negative
Yeah.
coming at you.
Yes. Yes.
And you have to figure out a way how to navigate that.
Mhm. Yes.
And to me, that's where I think it applies to so many things, because
Uh-huh.
it's like that same, maybe not to that same way, but that same kind of process occurs in almost everything we do. Like,
Yeah.
it's the same when you're in a relationship and you're like, well, should keep dating this person or should I
Yeah.
not? And you have that same kind of inner battle. It's the same in deciding like, well, should I quit this job or should I keep going? It's like maybe not as acute, but you have those same like, angel and devil on your shoulder telling you, go this way, no, go that way. So
Yes.
I think that's why it applies to everything, and I think that's what one of the beautiful things about running as a
Mm.
sport and also
Mhm.
metaphor for other things is that
Yep.
like, yes, there's physical talent and components to that, but in terms of you getting better, so much of it is like mastering that mental and psychological game.
Yes.
And if you can do that, then you're going to perform up to whatever potential you have, and that's
Yeah.
what it's all about.
That's so good. So good. I'm always like wanting to use the metaphor of athleticism for so much of my work, because just the tie-ins are they're just endless, and I feel like you learn so much about yourself, you learn so much about the world, and learn so much about just chasing after something and dedicating yourself to something when you're actually training for a goal and trying to make it happen. And so like your your transition from athleticism to performance outside of athleticism just makes so much sense in that regard. So well, I have not gotten my hands on your newest book yet, but I want to, but I would love to just maybe just give us the high level overview of what it's about. It's called Do Hard Things: Why We Get Resilience Wrong and the Surprising Science of Real Toughness. Yeah, tell us what's your hope with this text here.
Yeah, hopefully as the listeners can hear is I'm all about like this, how do you bring nuance to the conversation? And that's kind of my
Yeah.
goal in this new book, because often what we think is to handle those difficult moments, maybe like what we talked about earlier, is like you put your head down, you grind through it, you grit your teeth, and you just kind of persist no matter what. Well, that often backfires. And instead
Mm.
of saying like this is the only way, the new book is about there's a bunch of tools that we can utilize that aren't just a hammer to break through things. that allow us to get through difficult moments. Some are
Yeah.
like creating perspective, right? So if you can create that perspective so you can see, do I want to persist or do I want to go over this other path? Some of it
Mm.
is like acceptance and like, kindness to yourself, in the sense that instead of seeing quitting as like this big, huge negative thing, quitting could be the tough and right decision because it allows you to open up space for you to, do other things that might
Mm.
be more productive and align with who you are. And then the last thing on this toughness idea that and resilience that I really thought was important that I highlight in the book is it's also about not only individually, but how we lead.
Mm.
And often we think of leading and creating discipline or resilience in the workplace or our teams is about like creating these like authoritarian, like, I'm the boss environments
Yes.
and I'm going to
Top
be like,
down.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
top down. But that's not what the research psychology and top performers show us.
So fascinating.
Instead what it shows is if you have that top down approach, you essentially create people or tell people to respond out of fear.
Mm.
And when we respond out of fear, what happens is we're often put in a place where we're no longer playing to win. We're just playing not to lose or not to mess up or not to get punished.
Yeah.
And instead, if we create this environment that is like, yes, you might be challenged, but you're going to be supported. Yes, that like, you might be asked to do difficult things, but I'm going to give you some autonomy and freedom to choose,
Mm.
and some sense of choice, and that you can make progress. You're going to be in a better spot. And then on that last part, it's like, yes, progress is what we're after, but progress is not this linear line that
Yeah.
just goes up and up. It's going to be this journey. And that part of like being tough and creating resiliency is like accepting that that journey is often going to be winding, but it's about that journey and not necessarily like that end outcome and end goal that keeps you going.
I love that. Um, just writing notes because I think all this is so good. And I think that journey aspect is um, so frustrating, right? Because like I just want like the result. I just want to like be able to say, okay, I got from point A to point B, and instead, I'm like, okay, but I'm ending up, right now, I feel like I'm pretty far from point B, but that that is all part of the journey, which is just really, really. It's encouraging to know that that's all part of the process. That the journey itself is the journey. So yeah, thank you for that. What would creating a text like this, a book like this, like what is I don't know. I guess what are you thinking as you release something like this into the world? Like what is it like? Like what are your hopes? Right, we've kind of talked about like diversifying your sources of meaning, right? Like how does this fit into to your framework?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I like to think of it as if my job is to help people perform or whatever better, I can do that on an individual basis or a group basis, which is like one on one and teams or whatever have you, which helps somebody immensely.
Yeah.
But then on the opposite end of this is like in that one on one, you're only helping a couple people at a time, right? And then when you write books, you have this ability to help, hopefully thousands and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, and give them a new framework for seeing things. And that's where I think the book is like, of course, it's not me one-on-one coaching, but it's like, I literally have the privilege of, people reading again, 200 whatever pages of my writing and
Yeah.
listening to a message I'm conveying. So
Yeah.
I almost see this as like, an extension of a form of coaching. So
Yeah.
my hope of it is like not to convince people or like whatever, but it's just to get them to think about things in a different light, and then
Mhm.
also hopefully give them some tools that allow
Yeah.
them maybe to navigate, difficult moments or get a little bit more resilient that they can take away and apply to their life.
That's so great. What are is there any low hanging fruit as far as tools, resources for folks that want to improve their resilience? And I want to ask you the same thing about running as well. But let's talk about other kinds of performance and resilience. What are the things the major categories that someone should be thinking about?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple different things that I think are really important, which is one is um, if you can find ways to have a sense of control over
Mm,
whatever it is you're doing, you're going to be able to be more resilient. And if you
yeah,
look at, we'll use the athletic example. If you watch professional sports athletes, they almost all have like some sort of ritual routine they do before they perform, right? You
yeah,
see the baseball player who does like is crazy swings and touching of the gloves before he goes up to bat. The reason they do that is some fascinating brain research shows that like routines make us feel like we have control over uncertain times.
interesting.
So we can almost prime ourselves to perform. Another interesting, low-hanging fruit is also we talked earlier about well, your inner voice. Well, how you talk to yourself can shift how you can handle those difficult times and moments. And there's some fascinating research that shows that creating what we call psychological distance allows us to handle difficult things more. Well, what is psychological distance? Almost think of it as like, you know, as if you were giving your advice to a friend. You're able to have better perspective. So often you're able to like take something away from it. We can do that very simply with a couple tricks. One is changing from our inner voice from being first person, like I can do this or I should do whatever, to second or third person, like you or Steve or Dan. And it might sound
Wow.
weird to say like,
Yeah,
Dan, you know, Dan's got this or whatever have you.
yeah.
But what happens is the brain almost interprets it. It's almost like it dislodges our brain from like automatic mode and it says like, wait a minute, this voice is different. So I'm going to
Who's
listen to
saying
it.
that?
Yeah, exactly. So,
Wow.
and the same thing actually occurs if we take our inner voice outside. So,
Fascinating.
this is why if you watch professional tennis players, sometimes before they're about to serve, you can watch and see them muttering something to themselves.
Yeah.
Well, when we talk to ourselves outside, it's almost like a more primitive voice, and it's almost like we're hearing it as if someone else is saying it. So we listen to it better than like just our kind of inner bickering and arguments that often occur. So there's
Wow.
a couple,
I
simple
love
tricks
it.
that might help your listeners.
There's some super fascinating stuff there. I'm gonna start using that. I'm gonna start using those when I'm out on my run and telling Dan's got this. I
Exactly.
sometimes have to talk myself through it, but I've never heard that about the second and third person, and also just the externalizing piece. That makes sense. That like by externalizing it, like it's engaging more of your body to like vocalize, and your more senses, so it feels like it makes sense that it would give it more weight. But I hadn't heard of that before, so thank you for that. I definitely will put that on. And I'm always also thinking about these things with my kids because my kids, they'll always I'll ask them to do something, get in the car. I can't. Like, no, of course you can. And like I'm always telling them, we don't say I can't. Like I'm trying to like help them reframe
Yeah.
like how they're thinking, the words we're using shape our reality and shape the way we think about ourselves and our abilities. And so even just having some of these tools, I think will be really interesting for me to play with with them as well. So thank you for that. I'm curious, just because I know that your expertise is running. Like for folks that are listening that are like, I've tried to be a runner and I don't know that I have it in me, but I want to do it. Like I'm curious what, like that same question, but but about running. Like where's the low hanging fruit of building a running practice?
Yeah. So for big beginners, I think they make a couple crucial mistakes. Is they do too much or bite off too much for them to chew.
Yeah.
Because what we need is we need to make progress. And if we make progress, we're motivated and we show up. If we don't make progress, it gets discouraging and we just stop. We fall
Yes.
into like that. What's the point? So
Yes.
often what happens is new runners say, okay, I'm going to go for a run. Well, they go out and they try to run and they try and run really hard. And then they get tired and fatigued. And then they say, this sucks. Like, this is really
Yes.
exhausting.
Yes.
Well, the reality is you need to, how should I put it? You need to get fit enough to enjoy running
Mm,
before running becomes something that is like routine and enjoyable.
yeah.
So what that means is when you're looking at starting running is don't feel bad about alternating jogging and walking,
Yeah.
because maybe that's where you're at.
Yeah.
Because, for me, for example, I'm a lifelong runner, but like I go out the door and like 80 to 90% of the runs are easy and enjoyable. Like I can,
Mm.
think about whatever I need to think about, and I can like, have a full on conversation with a friend. So it's not like I'm out there like huffing and puffing the whole time, where often beginners are, because they don't quite have that fitness yet to allow them to do it easy. So what do?
Yeah.
You lower the bar, right? You say, okay, I'm gonna run a little bit, then I'm gonna walk. I'm gonna run a little
Yes.
bit, I'm gonna walk. Like take your dog for it. They love doing stuff like that. Whatever
I
it
love
is.
it.
But set that standard low so that you can then progress and come back to it and
Mm.
build off of that as well. And then the other thing that I think is really important for beginning runners is making it easy to get out the door. Because
Mm.
often what happens is the struggle is before you get out the door. Once you're
Yes.
out the door, you're like, well, I'm out here. I might as well get my run in. And this applies
Yes.
to me too. I'm sure it applies to you too. It's like
Oh,
there's times when
100%.
you're just sitting there like, do I really want to go? Do I want to put on my shoes? Whatever have
Yep.
you. And then
Yep.
you get out the door and you're like, oh, this is fine. Like I'll be all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like whatever you can do to make it easy on yourself to get started. So
Yes.
for beginners, that might be like, you know what? Put your running shoes like right by the door with your socks there, or your running clothes laid out, the night before. Like make it simple for you to say yes. And if you can do that, then often like you're going to get out the door more often than not.
I love it. So good. And I as you're describing, well, one, I'm so guilty in all of life of biting off more than I can chew, and I think I just kind of lucked out with running because I I was starting and had a lot of shin splints and stuff. This is probably 3 or 4 years ago. I have not been running seriously that long. But then after I could run a few miles, I made I'm really motivated by goals and setting goals for myself. And so I said, I'm going to run 365 miles this year. It's like kind of the beginning of January. And I was like, I could at that point run probably maybe almost 3 miles. And I think just like that slow progress of like a year of like just constant, like, 2 miles here, 3 miles there, 1 mile, a lot of days, like really built up like a really solid base for me, kind of without being, without I think even realizing what I was doing. So that then I had that fitness level as a baseline to go ahead and start doing more. I think more aggressive, more intentional things. So I think that's a great kind of framework for people to use as they think about running. Just as we move towards wrapping up, because I know we've been going a while here, but I just want to kind of circle all the way back around to you're talking about just the different sources of meaning, and I just want to ask you, in your life, like what are some of the main buckets that you use when you think about meaning in all of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that for my own, it comes from a different area. So, my family is obviously there. Like they bring a lot of meaning and purpose to my life as well. So that connection. I would also say, branching out from that, like my friends in my community,
Yeah.
like they provide that support and those connections and those lifelong friendship and that sense of belonging that is, I think, incredibly important. And then the things that I do as well, which I would say running and exercise is part of that, because it makes me like, it challenges me in different ways. It gives me something where, I can do something difficult and succeed or fail or what have you. And it gives me this place where I'm like allowed to explore my limits, which I think is important in creating that kind of sources of meaning. And
Yeah.
then also in my work pursuits.
Yeah.
So writing is incredibly meaningful for me. Coaching is incredibly meaningful. Even things like doing these podcasts, I think like is important because it's another avenue where it's like, well, it's different from writing in the sense that it's not just me sitting here and writing things, but we're having a conversation on really important things.
Yes.
So I should feel like very fortunate to be in a position where I can sit down with you, Dan, and like discuss these things that I'm passionate about and you're passionate about. And we can like hopefully, go on this journey together to where we're discovering things that maybe, us alone sitting at a desk weren't going to figure out by ourselves.
Absolutely.
So
I
there's
love it.
a lot of those things. And I think even, outside of podcasts, which comes back is it's like, to me, it's like, I want to be in a position where I can do and explore things that are interesting to me. And that gives me a lot of meaning. So even like with writing, part of why I love it is I'm allowed to go down a deep rabbit hole, and research and talk to interesting people and like really, wrestle with difficult topics for, sometimes years before I write a word. And that,
Yeah.
again, that also brings meaning because again, it allows me to explore ideas and interests that, maybe I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do so.
I love it. I love it. And I love just that multifaceted, I know we talked about it earlier, just the multifaceted definition and approach to meaning, I think is just so essential and so often missed by many. And so I hope for folks listening that you can follow Steve's example here to think about, your life as a holistic being. Like there's many different places to look for those real meaningful things. And if one area of life isn't working, that's okay. Not all areas of life are always going to be inherently meaningful. But that sometimes you make sacrifices in one in order to elevate and bring more focus to the others, which I think is just a really great example that you've given us here today, Steve. So thank you so much for all of this. I wish that I had like 2 more hours because I haven't even talked to you. Like I really wanted to come into this with like getting some free coaching lessons for how to beat my 5K goal and stuff like that. But I'll have to save those for next time. For folks that want to follow along with your work and connect with you, is there anything you'd like to invite them to?
Yeah, no, you can connect with me on all social media at Steve Magness, or check out my website, stevemagness.com. And of course, check out my new book, Do Hard Things. I appreciate, your listeners and the work that you're doing, Dan. I think it's really important.
Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching and listening. You can find links to everything that we talked about in our show notes at themeaningmovement.com. If you haven't left a rating or review wherever you're watching or listening, please take a moment to do that. On YouTube, you can hit that thumbs up button. On most of the podcast catchers, you can leave some sort of star rating plus a few words. And that is how people find this show. It's particularly helpful on Apple, but you can also do it on Spotify, Amazon, and a bunch of other podcast catchers. Our music is by Tom Roram. Our artwork is by Eleazar Ruiz. We'll be back with you shortly. Thanks so much.